What's up everyone, welcome back to another episode of The Playthrough, where I play through entire video game franchises and then review and rank them. I am your host Steve Trezza, and today I'll be talking about Resident Evil Code Veronica. When I started this playthrough of the entire Resident Evil franchise, originally I was just going to play the numerical games, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. As I did my research more, and I researched more about Code Veronica because I had never played it when it actually came out, I found out that the storyline is pretty detrimental to the overall story, and it kind of wraps up the whole Umbrella storyline also, so I figured, why not? Let's add that into the mix too, and then also I figured, why not? Let's just play the Revelation games too, so I'll play those down the line. But anyway, we'll get to that when we get there. Right now we're going to talk about Resident Evil Code Veronica. Resident Evil Code Veronica was originally released on February 29th, 2000 for the Dreamcast. Now, I played the Code Veronica X version, which has a few more cutscenes in it, and that was released a year later for the PlayStation 2. I played this on PlayStation 4. The game was directed by Hiroki Kato, and it was written by Noboru Sumagura, Hirohisa Soda, Junichi Miyashita, Akira Asara, Yasuyuki Suzuki, and Hideyuki Ishizaki, the writers for Resident Evil Code Veronica. And they did a fantastic job because the story is very good. So in doing my research on the Resident Evil games, I know that this game is generally pretty like a fan favorite among a lot of Resident Evil fans. And I know that people who dislike this game really dislike this game. So going into it, I know that there's this big divide between the two. And I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of dreading playing this game because it's 20 years old. And not that, games that are 20 years old can't be good, but that era of games, the PlayStation 1 kind of Dreamcast-y era of games, for me don't have as much replayability as the games of, Super Nintendo, and then the games that came after of PlayStation 2. So I was kind of dreading playing a game, again, with the fixed camera angles. If you've been watching, you know that I'm not a huge fan on fixed camera angles. But we'll get to that when we talk about the actual gameplay of the game. Right now, let's go over the plot really quick. So here's the plot line to Resident Evil Code Veronica, according to Wikipedia. In December 1998, 3 months after escaping from Racoon City prior to its eventual destruction, Claire Redfield raids an Umbrella Corporation facility in Paris in search of her brother, Chris Redfield. Discovered by Umbrella's security forces and eventually captured, Claire is imprisoned on Rockford Island, a prison complex owned by the corporation situated in the Southern Ocean. Sometime after her imprisonment, Claire finds herself released by one of the prison's staff and discovers that an outbreak of the T-virus had occurred. What a shocker. In the resulting chaos, she finds herself teaming up with Steve Burnside, another inmate seeking to escape. In their efforts to explore the island and find the means to leave, the pair finds themselves confronting the island's commander, Alfred Ashford. Both Claire and Steve find him to be mentally unstable, as a result of him switching between two personalities, his own and that of his twin sister, Alexia. Eventually, the pair manages to find a seaplane and use it to escape, only for Alfred to pursue them and switch their plane to autopilot, directing it towards another Umbrella facility in Antarctica. Upon their arrival, the pair finds that the facility has suffered an outbreak, and fight their way through the zombies and monsters within to seek a means of escape, battling with Alfred and fatally wounding him. Before he dies, Alfred frees his sister Alexia, who had been in cryogenic sleep within the facility after injecting herself with the T. Veronica virus, an experimental virus that the Ashford family had developed 15 years ago. Awakened, Alexia manages to recapture Claire and Steve as they attempt to escape. Meanwhile, Chris Redfield arrives on Rockford Island in search of Claire, after receiving a message from her via Leon S. Kennedy. Upon learning that she had left, Chris focuses on determining where and begins searching the island. In the process of doing so, he comes across Albert Wesker, an independent agent since the Spencer Mansion incident, the events of Resident Evil, who is seeking to retrieve a sample of the T. Veronica virus. After Chris learns of his sister's whereabouts, and Wesker discovers that Alexia is alive and carries what he needs, the two separately find their way to Antarctica. Once there, Chris frees his sister and helps her to search for Steve, only to find that he had been experimented with and injected with the T. Veronica virus. After mutating, Steve attempts to kill Claire, but fails, regaining control of himself to turn on Alexia, who then inflicts a mortal wound on him. Before Steve dies, he confesses his love for Claire. Meanwhile, Chris and Wesker confront Alexia. In the resulting conflict, Wesker escapes and manages to retrieve Steve's corpse for further experimentation, while Chris manages to defeat Alexia and escape with his sister before the Antarctic facility self-destructs. So there you have it, the story, and that was kind of the cliff notes of the story. I feel like a lot was left out, especially of that subplot storyline between Alfred and Alexia Ashford. which I thought was one of the best subplot storylines within the Resident Evil series so far. So let's talk about the story. That's one of the things that a lot of Resident Evil players, Resident Evil fans talk about when they talk about Resident Evil Code Veronica, is that this story is one of the best in the franchise, and this story definitely drove me in. And the way that it was presented drew me in even more so than anything else. You know, the score, the environment, just the sounds of the game. The presentation was fantastic. The storyline of this game I thought was really good. The subplots, the Ashford story, when you dig deep through the files and read more about the Ashford story, it's a very compelling story for the Resident Evil franchise. And the direction of the game with the cutscenes and just where the story goes, for the time, fantastic. And it still kind of holds up today, although it is a little bit dated. But aside from all that, you also get more history on Umbrella. You get this really fleshed out Albert Wesker, I feel like. I mean, he was in previous games, you know, Resident Evil 1, we see him as kind of the main antagonist, but his character isn't really fleshed out that much. You kind of just fight him at the end and he escapes, and we don't really find out that much about him. I mean, you find out a little bit more when you read through the files through the game, but in this game, this really fleshed him out as the villain of the Resident Evil franchise, and this will come back again in Resident Evil 5, but I feel like this is the game that kind of gave him more personality that we come to know in future games. Let's talk about Steve Burnside. All right, quite possibly my least favorite character so far in the Resident Evil games.
Oh, I need those. Give them to me.
You gotta be kidding. I found it and I'm keeping it.
While the story is good, the voice acting still isn't that great. And again, this could be a product of its time, but Steve was just not a very believable character. His dialogue's very cheesy. He's constantly like running away from Claire.
I don't want you following me, lady. You'll only slow me down.
When they're trying to be together, and then at one point he like tries to kiss her while she's sleeping, which is a little rapey and kind of weird. And then at the end, when he dies, he says that he loves her, and there's like no chemistry between them. I mean, there's more chemistry between Claire and Leon. Even in the original Resident Evil 2, there's more chemistry between them. There was just nothing. It just seemed forced, and it seemed really bad and cheesy, and he's just not a good character, in my opinion. And when he's supposed to be like defending her, he just runs away. And I get that it's because back then the game maybe couldn't handle like the co-op or like the two good characters on the same team at the same time type of deal, but it just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit at all. And it's really weird, and it makes me just hate him as a character, and I'm glad that he died at the end. You kind of get the feeling from Claire that like maybe she thinks he's like kind of cute, but you never get that feeling that she's like attracted to him or like likes him like that. So like when he dies and says I love you, that falls flat. And then also Claire's like crying over his death, which I mean, yeah, I guess, but again, it seemed kind of forced there. So outside of Steve, the rest of the storyline of the game was pretty good. The voice acting was meh. He's just not a great character. But overall, I think that this is one of the best stories that we've seen in the franchise up to this point. And we'll see where we go from here. So let's talk gameplay. As I said before, I was kind of dreading playing the game because it's an older game and having to go back to the whole fixed camera after I played 2 and 3, which were, you know, the remakes, and they have the third person camera that I love. It was not as bad as I expected it to be. In fact, it wasn't even really bad at all. Okay, that's a lie. There's some parts that were very frustrating. There's a couple parts where you get attacked by a group of zombies and trying to like turn around and run away from them or even take them on at once. It's just hard to maneuver and move around in these old fixed camera games. I do think the way that the game played was a lot better than Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 0, whereas the camera does follow you a lot, even though it's fixed, it kind of like moves with you, whereas in those games it was kind of just sitting in one position. So I did enjoy that a little bit more. There was definitely a little bit of a learning curve when I first started playing to get back into that like mode of playing, but I got over it and it was great. After playing a couple times, I was hooked and I was drawn in and forgot about that. Graphically, the game is dated, and we know that. It's a 20-year-old game, but it's still passable. I didn't mind it at all, really. And it was long. It felt long as shit. Looking back at my playtime, I played this about around the same time that it took me to beat 0 and 1, about 15 hours for all 3, but it felt longer And maybe that's because I'm going from the 3 remake, which took me about 7 hours to beat, and then, this game's double that in length, so that could be why also. But that's not a complaint, long games are good, that doesn't bother me at all. The puzzles. Now I have some kind of like mixed emotions about the puzzles. Puzzles were super hard, I feel like, and there were some times, I will admit, that I had to look up how to do some things, and it just brings me back to like in 2000, 20 years ago when this game came out. I know the internet was around, but it wasn't as readily accessible. And how did people like go about figuring some of these things out? Because I would have been running in every room, double checking, triple checking, a lot of backtracking that just like wastes a bunch of time. And I enjoy it when puzzles are challenging, but sometimes it was like they did not let up on these challenging puzzles. Overall, I liked it a lot, but there's some things where it was like, how did I even know that this was here? I missed the Magnum later in the game, which kind of fucked me because when I got the fire extinguisher at the beginning of the game, I didn't put it in the safe box. I put it in like that metal detection box that you go through at that early part, and it remained there, and then I couldn't get it back. So I missed out on getting the Magnum, couldn't get that. Apparently the assault rifle was in one of the lockers in the same room that the Magnum was in, and I missed that. I didn't even know. And I'm pretty thorough in checking things, but somehow I just glossed over these, I guess. So it just made the game harder for me. And then a minor complaint of mine, I had most of my weapons as Claire, and I tried to, keep all of the grenade launcher ammo and everything like that on her. And I didn't put any of those weapons into the save box. So when I moved as Chris, I just had the handgun. I didn't have anything else. I had to defeat the gulp worm with the handgun. And I felt like I kind of struggled a little bit as Chris because I just didn't have this extra ammo. I didn't know when to put it in there. But I guess that's how you play the game. You live and you learn and you just keep going. And if I were to play again, now I know the strategy behind it. I went in with zero strategy and I missed out on a bunch of items. Tons of bosses in this game. This game is filled with bosses, but a lot of them you didn't really need to kill. You just needed to run up, grab the item that you needed, and then run away and try not to get hit. And that's what I did for a lot of the bosses. And the bosses that you actually do have to fight, I think my favorite boss fight, although I did die a lot because I was very low in health and I had to go back to an old save point so that I could get more health to beat him, was the Tyrant on the plane. Because it gives you something to do. It wasn't just you have to run away. It was you have to shoot him, you have to make sure that he's like kind of injured and then eject the crate off the plane to eject him off the plane. And I like that. I think this is hands down the best boss fight in the game. The other ones, the Nosferatu fight wasn't bad either. But over the past 20 years, aiming with a sniper rifle has gotten a lot easier on current gen games than it had been back then. So like the drift and the motion of it was a little hard to get down. And that goes for the final boss fight with Alexia too. When I finally got to Alexia, I learned to put all of my heavy weapons in the bin before I switched back to Chris. So I had a shit ton of grenade rounds and acid rounds and flame rounds and flame bow rounds, I don't know what they're called. And I just unloaded on her and destroyed her. And then when she flew, it was a little tough to hit her with that like supercharged weapon, but I just fired into the air as best as I could. Eventually one of the shots hit her and that was it, game over. While it was kind of just one dimensional and just like, let's just blow the shit out of her, it wasn't bad, but I think the plane Tyrant fight, probably best fight in the game. So there you have it, that's my thoughts on Resident Evil Code Veronica. So my current rankings right now, Resident Evil 2 Remake at 1, Resident Evil 3 Remake at 2, Resident Evil HD Remaster, Resident Evil 0. So where am I gonna put Resident Evil Code Veronica? I'm gonna have to put Resident Evil Code Veronica over Resident Evil 3 and under Resident Evil 2. So I think that's where it's gonna go, right at the second spot. I just think it's an overall better game. I know 3 is very cinematic and I enjoyed it, but I think in terms of overall game, I think Code Veronica takes it, and I can see why people love this game and why it's such a fan favorite in the series. So my new ranking of the Resident Evil series, Resident Evil 2 Remake, Resident Evil Code Veronica, Resident Evil 3 Remake, Resident Evil HD Remaster, Resident Evil 0. Hey, thank you guys for watching. Next time I will be reviewing Resident Evil 4. And when this came out, it was my favorite Resident Evil game, and when I played it. I haven't played it since its initial release on the GameCube, so it'll be interesting to see what it's like to revisit this and go back to this game, you know, was it 16 years later or something like that? So be sure to watch that when I release that video next time. If you like what you saw here, it would mean a lot to me if you just gave my video a big thumbs up. If you head on over to my channel and follow me and watch me play through other video game franchises. If you have a suggestion, leave it in the comments below, or let me know what you thought of Resident Evil Code Veronica and where you think it should fall in the rankings amongst the franchises. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and I will see you next time.